Former officer ordered the Black Royal Guard to leave, but the guard's calm response crushed him. He was a man who had spent decades serving his
I told him
country,
we'd be here all
rising
afternoon
through the
if he didn't
ranks with
hurry up.
determination, discipline, and a sharp mind.
He certainly seemed to take
Even
that to
after
heart.
retiring from the army, he could not shake the habit of walking with a straight back, chest out, and eyes scanning the surroundings as if always on alert. People often noticed the commanding presence he carried, a presence that demanded respect, whether he was speaking or simply standing silently in a room. He believed in order, authority, and the idea that people should follow rules without question. That belief had carried him far during his career, earning him medals, accolades, and a sense of personal achievement that few could understand. That morning, he woke early as usual. The sun had just begun to rise, spilling soft light across his study, casting long shadows of the shelves filled with books, maps, and old photographs of his days in service. He brewed a cup of strong black coffee and sat down at the desk, reflecting on his life. Though he had retired, there were moments when he missed the sharp sense of purpose that his role in the army had given him. Life now felt quieter, slower, almost too ordinary, but today was special. He had been invited to attend a ceremonial event at the royal palace. It was not often that he received invitations like this, and he wanted to make a good impression. This was his chance to step into a world of grandeur, tradition, and elegance, a world that operated on rules, protocol, and respect. By the time he arrived at the palace gates, the morning air was crisp. The palace itself was a magnificent structure, with tall stone walls, elegant arches, and intricate designs that spoke of centuries of history. Guards in pristine uniforms stood at attention, their posture perfect, their faces calm and unreadable. Among them were the Black Royal Guards, an elite unit known for their discipline, loyalty, and quiet strength. They were not ordinary soldiers. They were selected for their calm demeanor, mental strength, and the ability to remain unshaken in any situation. Hayes had heard stories about them during his career. Many had tried to test their patience, to assert authority over them, only to find themselves humbled. But in his mind, he was different. After all, he was a colonel, a man accustomed to command and respect. Surely he could handle a few guards. As he approached the entrance, his eyes fixed on the line of Black Royal Guards standing silently, like statues carved from black stone. Their uniforms were immaculate, their gloves spotless, and their eyes forward focused, yet seemingly aware of everything around them. Their leader, Sergeant Malik, was a man whose presence alone could command attention. He stood taller than most, with broad shoulders and a calm expression that seemed to radiate authority without a single word spoken. Hayes observed him closely, sizing him up, confident that a few words would be enough to make them move aside. Without hesitation, Hayes strode toward the unit, his boots clicking loudly against the polished stone pathway. He raised his hands slightly, signaling them to step aside, and in a firm, commanding voice he said, "Move aside." "I need passage immediately." His tone left no room for discussion, or so he thought. For a moment there was silence. The guards did not flinch. Their formation remained perfect, and their eyes never left their fixed points. Hayes felt a slight twinge of surprise. This was not how people usually reacted to him. Most followed orders without hesitation, respecting the uniform, the rank, and the authority that came with it. But these guards were different. They did not move. They did not speak. They simply stood, calm and unwavering, as if time itself had paused around them. Hayes's initial surprise quickly turned into irritation. He repeated his command, louder this time, the sharp edge in his voice unmistakable. "I said move." His hand gestured more forcefully now, pointing at the path he wanted to clear. Around him, palace staff and other attendees began to notice the interaction. A few whispered to each other, casting curious glances at the former officer and the Black Royal Guards. There was a sense of tension in the air, an unspoken understanding that something unusual was unfolding. Sergeant Malik finally spoke, his voice calm, steady, and completely controlled. "Sir, our duty is to the palace and the crown. We cannot move without direct orders from our command. Please understand, it is not personal. It is our honor." The words struck Hayes in a way he had not expected. He had been prepared for resistance, but he had imagined it would be met with excuses, hesitation, or even fear. Not this calm, measured response. Malik's voice was not challenging or disrespectful. It was composed, respectful, and carried the weight of conviction. It was clear that the guard's loyalty was to something greater than any individual, even someone of high rank like Hayes. Hayes paused, his mind racing. His years of experience had taught him to assert authority decisively, to expect immediate compliance. But here was a situation that did not follow the usual rules. These guards were not ordinary men. They were disciplined, trained, and bound by a sense of honor that refused to bend under personal power. For the first time in a long while, Hayes felt a flicker of uncertainty. His chest, which usually rose with confidence, now seemed slightly tight. His hands, which had gestured firmly, were now still at his sides. Around him, the crowd of attendees began to shift subtly, sensing the unusual energy. Some watched quietly, curious about how a seasoned officer would react. Others whispered to each other, clearly impressed by the restraint of the guards. The tension was delicate, like the pause before a storm breaks. Hayes, used to commanding and receiving obedience, found himself in a rare position, facing discipline and calm that could not be commanded, only respected. He tried again, adjusting his approach. Perhaps, he thought, a more persuasive tone would work. "Gentlemen, I am Colonel Hayes. I have served my country for many years. I ask you again to step aside." There was no anger in his voice now, only authority and expectation. Yet the guards did not move. Their leader's eyes met his, calm and steady, conveying a message that went beyond words. "We are here to serve a purpose greater than personal rank." Hayes felt a mixture of surprise and admiration. These men were unwavering, not because of fear or punishment, but because of principle. They were bound by something deeper than obedience. They were bound by honor. He had encountered discipline in his career, but nothing quite like this. The Black Royal Guards did not rely on intimidation or threat. They relied on inner strength, focus, and loyalty to a cause greater than themselves. As Hayes studied them, he began to notice the small details that made them remarkable. The way they stood perfectly still, their posture impeccable, hands at precise angles, eyes forward but aware. The way their breathing was controlled, slow and steady, unhurried. The way each man's presence seemed to radiate quiet confidence, a kind of strength that did not need to shout to be recognized. Hayes realized that this was not a challenge to his authority. It was a demonstration of integrity, discipline, and the kind of loyalty that could not be commanded, only earned. Minutes passed, though it felt longer. Hayes's initial frustration softened into a mixture of respect and reflection. He realized that this encounter was teaching him a lesson he had not expected. Authority was not always about rank or power. Sometimes it was about restraint, calm, and dedication to duty. The Black Royal Guards embodied a level of professionalism that went beyond anything he had experienced in his own career. He finally stepped back, lowering his hand, and took a slow breath. There was no bitterness, no defeat, only understanding. The guards remained in their position, silent and dignified, their calm presence a quiet reminder that true strength was often invisible, yet impossible to ignore. Hayes looked around at the audience, noticing their admiration and intrigue. The story of this encounter, he realized, would be one worth sharing, not for pride or recognition, but as a lesson in humility and respect. Even as he walked past the Black Royal Guards, Hayes carried with him a sense of awe. Their calm, disciplined response had reminded him that life, even after decades of experience and success, always had lessons to offer. Authority was not a tool to be wielded recklessly. Respect could not be demanded, it had to be acknowledged, and sometimes it was shown in ways that did not involve words at all. That morning, Colonel Richard Hayes had come to the palace expecting recognition and ease. Instead, he had encountered something far more powerful: the quiet, unwavering strength of men committed to a principle greater than themselves. It was a lesson that would stay with him for the rest of his life, shaping how he thought about leadership, authority, and respect. After the brief encounter at the palace entrance, Colonel Richard Hayes felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. The calm response of Sergeant Malik and the Black Royal Guards had unsettled him in a way he had never experienced in his long military career. Normally, he was the one who commanded respect, who had the experience, the authority, and the knowledge to make people follow orders without question. Yet here he was, facing a unit that neither flinched nor reacted to his authority. Instead, they responded with quiet strength, discipline, and unwavering loyalty to a higher purpose. Hayes could feel a prickling sense of humility growing inside him, though he was not yet ready to fully admit it. He took a moment to compose himself, adjusting his uniform and clearing his throat as he prepared to enter the grand hall for the ceremonial event. The palace corridors were adorned with intricate paintings, golden chandeliers, and polished marble floors that reflected the soft glow of morning sunlight. Every detail seemed designed to inspire awe and respect, and Hayes couldn't help but feel the contrast between the grandeur of the surroundings and the simplicity of the Black Royal Guards' presence at the entrance. The guards had not needed gold, silk, or decorations to demonstrate their authority. Their presence alone was commanding. As Hayes walked further into the palace, he found himself surrounded by a mix of palace officials, visiting dignitaries, and staff who were quietly observing the former officer. Some gave subtle nods of respect, others exchanged glances filled with curiosity. It was clear that the incident at the entrance had left an impression. While Hayes had initially felt frustrated, a part of him also felt an unspoken challenge, a realization that his understanding of authority might not be as complete as he had once believed. He entered the ceremonial hall, where the atmosphere was alive with anticipation. The hall was spacious, with high ceilings, decorative tapestries, and rows of chairs arranged neatly for attendees. The scent of polished wood and fresh flowers filled the air. Musicians played soft melodies in the background, adding to the elegance of the occasion. Hayes took a seat near the front, close enough to observe the proceedings closely. His eyes wandered briefly toward the entrance, where he could still see the Black Royal Guards stationed with the same composed demeanor. Even from a distance, their posture remained impeccable, their movements minimal but precise, each one exuding confidence and discipline. As the ceremony progressed, Hayes's thoughts drifted back to the encounter. He recalled the calm, steady voice of Sergeant Malik, the way he had spoken without anger or hesitation, and the unspoken strength that radiated from the entire unit. It was not simply obedience that had impressed Hayes, it was the dignity and integrity behind it. The guards were not following orders out of fear or obligation. They were bound by a deeper principle, one that commanded respect naturally. Hayes realized that he had always measured authority by compliance. If someone followed his orders, he felt powerful. If they did not, he felt frustrated. But the Black Royal Guards were teaching him something far more valuable. True authority could exist without threats, loud voices, or demands. After the ceremony, Hayes decided to observe the guards more closely. The event had ended, but the attendees lingered, exchanging polite conversation, smiles, and handshakes. Hayes noticed how the Black Royal Guards maintained their composure even when people passed by them, attempting to speak or interact. The guards acknowledged each person with subtle nods, but never broke their disciplined formation. They moved only when absolutely necessary, their actions measured and deliberate. Hayes began to understand that their strength was not in action, but in restraint, in the ability to remain focused and calm regardless of external pressures. At one point, a young palace attendant approached the guards to ask a question about the ceremony schedule. While other soldiers might have answered quickly, perhaps even with impatience if disturbed, the Black Royal Guards responded with patience and courtesy. Sergeant Malik answered clearly, explaining the details with precision and respect. The interaction was brief, yet it demonstrated the balance of professionalism and kindness, the perfect combination of authority and approachability. Hayes watched quietly, realizing that the strength of these men lay not only in their ability to stand firm, but also in their ability to act thoughtfully and respectfully when the situation required it. As the day continued, Hayes's curiosity grew. He began to engage in conversations with palace staff and officials, discreetly asking about the Black Royal Guards. He learned that each member of the unit underwent rigorous training, not only in physical combat and tactics, but also in discipline, emotional control, and ethical decision-making. They were taught to respond with calmness under pressure, to prioritize the safety and honor of the palace above personal feelings, and to act as representatives of a legacy that spanned generations. Hayes was impressed. This was far beyond anything he had experienced in his military career, where obedience often relied on rank and fear of consequences rather than personal integrity. During a brief pause in the event, Hayes found himself near the guards again. He decided to test his assumptions, not out of malice but out of genuine curiosity. He stepped slightly closer and said in a softer voice, "Sergeant Malik, I wonder, what keeps you and your unit so disciplined, so focused? How do you remain so calm, even when faced with unexpected situations?" Malik's response was as calm and steady as before. "Sir, our discipline comes from understanding our purpose. We know why we are here, and we know what is expected of us. Fear and ego have no place in our service. When you focus on duty and honor rather than personal recognition, calmness comes naturally. Strength is not in aggression, it is in control." Hayes absorbed the words silently. He realized that the lesson went beyond this particular moment. It applied to life, leadership, and the way people approached challenges. He thought about his own career, the times when he had relied on authority to get results, sometimes using pressure or intimidation to ensure compliance. In comparison, the Black Royal Guards embodied a philosophy that relied on inner strength, awareness, and patience. Hayes understood that there was a profound difference between commanding respect through fear and earning it through integrity. Later in the afternoon, a situation arose that further tested the discipline of the guards. A group of tourists accidentally wandered into a restricted area near the palace courtyard. They were unaware of the rules, curious about the grandeur surrounding them. Normally, such incidents might lead to chaos or confusion, but the Black Royal Guards handled it with grace. One of the guards approached the group calmly, explaining the rules politely and guiding them back to the correct path without raising his voice or showing annoyance. The tourists, impressed by the professionalism and kindness, thanked the guard before continuing on their way. Hayes observed silently, noting the contrast between this measured approach and the command-based methods he had relied on in his own career. The day drew to a close, and the ceremonial event was officially over. Hayes prepared to leave, but before he could do so, he felt compelled to speak with Sergeant Malik one more time. "Sergeant, I must admit, your conduct today has left a strong impression on me. I came expecting to assert authority, but instead I have learned a lesson in restraint, discipline, and respect. How do you maintain such composure under pressure?" Malik looked at him with the same calm expression he had carried all day. "Sir, composure is a choice. It comes from understanding oneself, one's duty, and the bigger picture. We do not let pride, anger, or impatience guide our actions. We act with purpose, always remembering the responsibility we carry." Hayes nodded slowly, reflecting on the profound wisdom in those words. He realized that his journey that day had been more than attending a ceremony. It had been a lesson in humility, self-awareness, and leadership. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of admiration for someone else's approach, acknowledging that strength could exist in silence, in calmness, and in unwavering commitment to principles rather than rank. As he exited the palace gates, Hayes glanced back at the Black Royal Guards one last time. They remained in their positions, unshaken and dignified, embodying the essence of discipline and honor. Hayes felt a deep respect for them, understanding that their calm response had subtly yet profoundly challenged his own sense of authority. He had learned that true leadership was not about imposing oneself on others, but about earning respect through integrity, patience, and purpose. The encounter stayed with him long after he returned home. He reflected on the day repeatedly, sharing the story quietly with his family and close friends. Every time he recounted the events, he emphasized the calm strength, the dignity, and the discipline of the Black Royal Guards. Hayes knew that the lesson he had learned would influence the way he approached situations in the future, whether in personal interactions, professional settings, or moments that required leadership and patience. By the end of the day, Colonel Richard Hayes understood that the calm response of the Black Royal Guards had done more than challenge him. It had reshaped his understanding of what it meant to lead, to command respect, and to act with honor. He realized that discipline and patience could be more powerful than authority and loud commands, and that true strength often lay in restraint and composure rather than dominance. As the days passed after the ceremonial event at the palace, Colonel Richard Hayes could not stop thinking about the Black Royal Guards. Their calm, disciplined response had unsettled him in ways he had never expected. Normally, his life had been filled with the certainty of command. When he spoke, people listened. When he acted, others followed. But the memory of Sergeant Malik and his unit stood as a quiet, constant reminder that authority was not always tied to rank. Hayes felt an unusual mix of frustration, admiration, and curiosity, he decided to return to the palace. It was not out of obligation or duty, but out of a desire to understand the guards better. He wanted to see them in action, to observe how they carried themselves in their daily routines, and to perhaps learn what it was that made their discipline so unshakable. Arriving at the palace, Hayes noticed the same air of serenity and order that had impressed him days before. Courtiers moved gracefully, attendants carried out their duties without chaos, and the Black Royal Guards stood as steadfast pillars at strategic points, calm and focused. Hayes approached the main entrance, this time without the intention of testing authority. Instead, he wanted to observe quietly. Sergeant Malik noticed him immediately, acknowledging him with a subtle nod that conveyed recognition without arrogance. Hayes felt a sense of relief. Today was not about ego. Today was about understanding, learning, and reflection. As the day unfolded, a situation arose that would become the true test of the guards' discipline and, indirectly, Hayes's understanding of leadership. A group of visiting diplomats had arrived unexpectedly. Their delegation was large and uncoordinated, and they were unfamiliar with palace protocols. Some tried to walk through restricted areas, while others spoke loudly, disrupting the calm environment. Many officials looked tense, unsure of how to manage the situation. Hayes watched closely, noting how the Black Royal Guards moved with precision. Without raising their voices or showing irritation, they guided the diplomats, maintaining order through calm gestures and subtle signals. Their actions were smooth and natural, not forced or aggressive. Each guard seemed to anticipate the next movement, adjusting quietly to prevent any disruption. Hayes could not help but admire their professionalism. At one point, a diplomat accidentally brushed past one of the guards, almost bumping into him. In a different situation, someone might have reacted sharply or with visible annoyance. Yet the guard remained composed. With a small, respectful gesture, he guided the diplomat back on course, speaking softly to explain the rules. The diplomat, slightly embarrassed, thanked him politely. Hayes felt a deep sense of awe. The strength of the guard was not in intimidation or commands. It was in calmness, patience, and understanding. This incident triggered a series of reflections in Hayes's mind. He recalled his own experiences during his military career. There had been moments when he had relied on shouting orders or asserting dominance to maintain control. While it had often worked, he realized now that such authority could be fragile. In contrast, the Black Royal Guards relied on inner strength, self-discipline, and a sense of purpose. Their authority was quiet but absolute. It was earned, not demanded. Hayes decided to observe them even closer. He followed Sergeant Malik as he moved through the courtyard, interacting with staff, guiding visitors, and maintaining the ceremonial flow. Malik's movements were deliberate, his posture always upright, and his expressions calm. Every action was precise yet gentle, demonstrating a perfect balance between firmness and approachability. Hayes could see that Malik's leadership was based on example rather than orders. The other guards mirrored his composure, creating an environment of respect and order without the need for harsh commands. During a brief moment of quiet, Hayes finally spoke to Malik again, this time with genuine curiosity. "Sergeant, how do you maintain such control under pressure? How do you keep your team so disciplined, even when unexpected situations arise?" Malik paused for a moment, considering the question. Then he replied in his calm, measured tone. "Sir, discipline comes from understanding purpose. Each of us knows why we are here and what is expected of us. We focus on duty, not personal pride. Control is not something you demand from others. It is something you maintain within yourself. When you act with clarity, patience, and respect, those around you naturally follow." Hayes listened, absorbing the words slowly. He realized that Malik's approach was not only effective but also deeply human. It relied on understanding, empathy, and self-control. It was a form of leadership that inspired trust and respect, rather than fear or compliance. Hayes felt a quiet shift within himself, a growing awareness that his own understanding of leadership had been incomplete. The day grew more challenging when a sudden incident occurred. A small child, who had wandered away from a visiting family, ran into the courtyard, unaware of the guards and ceremonial activities. Panic began to ripple through the crowd as attendants and officials scrambled to catch the child. Hayes instinctively moved forward, but he noticed the guards' response. They remained calm, composed, and efficient. Malik signaled quietly to one guard, who intercepted the child gently, guiding him back to his family with care and kindness. No one was shouted at, no one was alarmed, and the child remained safe and unharmed. Hayes was impressed. In that moment, the guard's discipline was not only about authority, but also about protection, empathy, and responsibility. Their calmness had prevented panic, ensured safety, and maintained order simultaneously. Hayes reflected on his own experiences during emergencies, recalling times when rapid orders had created confusion rather than clarity. Here, discipline and composure had produced results far more effective than any command could have. As the afternoon progressed, Hayes had the opportunity to speak with other palace officials about the Black Royal Guards. He learned that their training was extensive and ongoing, focusing not only on physical readiness, but also on mental resilience, emotional intelligence, and ethical behavior. Each guard was selected carefully, trained to embody the principles of honor, patience, and self-control. Hayes began to understand that their strength was not simply in their military skill, but in the integrity and consistency of their character. Later, Hayes was invited to observe a ceremonial drill conducted by the guards. They moved in perfect synchronization, their steps measured and precise, their posture unbroken, and their expressions serene. Hayes noted how even small mistakes were corrected gently, without criticism or frustration. The guards guided each other with quiet gestures, reinforcing teamwork and cohesion through mutual respect rather than hierarchy. Hayes realized that this was a lesson not only in discipline, but in human interaction. Respect, patience, and calmness could achieve more than authority alone ever could. During a brief break in the drill, Hayes found himself walking alongside Malik again. He spoke quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. "I have commanded men for years. I have led troops into challenging situations, but I have never seen discipline like this, calm, steady, and completely unwavering. How do you cultivate this in your team?" Malik smiled faintly. "Sir, discipline is cultivated by focusing on what matters most. Fear and ego only weaken control. When each member understands their purpose and the importance of their actions, composure comes naturally. Leadership is not about power, it is about example. When you lead by integrity, others follow willingly." Hayes nodded, a sense of humility washing over him. He realized that the calm authority of the Black Royal Guards had taught him more in one day than decades of his own experience had. It was a reminder that true leadership was not measured by compliance, but by influence, respect, and integrity. The day ended with a final ceremonial inspection. The guards stood in formation, their posture perfect, their expressions calm and confident. Hayes watched as Malik led the unit with quiet precision, each movement synchronized, each guard attentive yet composed. Hayes could see the pride in their service, a pride not tied to rank or reward, but to duty, honor, and purpose. As Hayes prepared to leave, he felt a deep sense of admiration and respect. The day had been more than an observation. It had been a lesson, a turning point in his understanding of authority and leadership. He realized that the calm response of the Black Royal Guards had not only challenged his assumptions, but had also reshaped his perspective. True strength, he understood now, came not from dominance or loud commands, but from restraint, integrity, and the quiet power of disciplined action. On his way out, Hayes glanced one final time at the guards. Their serene composure, unwavering discipline, and quiet strength left an indelible impression on him. For the first time in many years, he felt humbled, not by defeat, but by the realization that there were lessons in leadership and life that could not be learned from rank or experience alone. The calmness of the Black Royal Guards had shown him a path toward true authority, one built on respect, integrity, and self-mastery rather than fear or ego. As he drove away from the palace, Hayes reflected on everything he had witnessed that day. He thought about his own career, the way he had measured authority, and the new understanding he had gained. He realized that the lessons of the Black Royal Guards were not limited to the palace or ceremonial events. They applied to every aspect of life. Leadership, discipline, patience, and respect were qualities that transcended titles, rank, or status. Hayes knew he would carry this lesson with him forever. Colonel Richard Hayes left the palace that evening with a feeling he had not experienced in many years. The day had been long, filled with lessons that challenged his long-held beliefs about authority, discipline, and leadership. For decades, he had measured success by obedience, rank, and compliance. Yet in the calm, steady presence of Sergeant Malik and the Black Royal Guards, he had discovered a completely different perspective, one that emphasized restraint, honor, and inner strength over loud commands or personal power. As he drove home, Hayes replayed the events in his mind. He thought about the ceremonial hall, the visiting diplomats, the wandering child, and countless other moments where the guards' calmness had prevented chaos. Each incident had been subtle but powerful, demonstrating the quiet influence of discipline guided by integrity. Hayes realized that the lessons he had learned could not be forgotten or ignored. They were too profound. He understood now that leadership was not about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about acting with purpose, respecting others, and earning trust through consistent, honorable behavior. That evening, Hayes returned to his home, a modest yet comfortable place filled with memories of his military career. The walls were lined with photographs, medals, and certificates, a testament to years of service. Normally, he would have felt pride in these accomplishments, a quiet satisfaction in the life he had built. But tonight, the medals and certificates seemed less important. They were symbols of achievement, yes, but they could not compare to the lessons he had learned from the Black Royal Guards, lessons that no award or recognition could ever fully represent. Hayes sat in his study, sipping a cup of tea, reflecting deeply on what he had witnessed. He thought about the moments when he had relied on authority to assert control, often expecting compliance without question. He recalled situations where impatience or frustration had led to tension or misunderstanding. Now, he saw those moments in a new light. The calmness of the Black Royal Guards had taught him that influence is more effective than force, that respect earned through integrity lasts far longer than obedience gained through fear or status. The next morning, Hayes awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. He felt compelled to share the lessons he had learned, not out of pride, but to inspire others. He began writing notes and reflections about the Black Royal Guards, their discipline, and their approach to leadership. Each word he wrote reminded him of the power of calmness, patience, and integrity. He described how a quiet nod, a measured gesture, or a soft word could achieve more than shouted commands. He emphasized the importance of understanding one's purpose and acting with honor in every situation, no matter how small or significant. In the weeks that followed, Hayes began to integrate these lessons into his own life. He approached interactions with family, friends, and former colleagues differently. He listened more carefully, spoke more thoughtfully, and responded to challenges with measured composure. Situations that might have once caused frustration or impatience were now met with calm analysis and respectful action. Hayes found that the principles embodied by the Black Royal Guards could be applied not only in leadership but in everyday life, creating harmony, understanding, and positive influence. One day, Hayes received an invitation to return to the palace for another event. This time, he went not with the intention of observing authority or testing discipline, but to experience the environment with respect and appreciation. Upon arrival, he was greeted by the same serene atmosphere, the polished floors, the quiet efficiency of the palace staff, and of course, the Black Royal Guards. Hayes felt a sense of familiarity and calm. He understood now that their strength lay not in asserting dominance, but in embodying principles that others could recognize and respect naturally. During the event, Hayes had a chance to speak privately with Sergeant Malik. "Sergeant," he began, "I want to thank you for the lessons you and your unit have taught me. I have spent decades commanding men, yet I have learned more about leadership from observing your calmness and discipline than I ever did in my career." Malik's expression remained calm, yet there was a subtle warmth in his eyes. "Sir," Malik replied, "we are all constantly learning. Leadership is not about being the loudest or the most forceful. It is about understanding, patience, and integrity. When you act with honor, others follow naturally. That is the true power of discipline." Hayes nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He realized that the Black Royal Guards had done more than teach him about authority. They had shown him the value of humility. True strength, he understood, was not in asserting oneself over others, but in controlling oneself, acting with purpose, and respecting the responsibilities one carried. As the months passed, Hayes continued to reflect on his experiences. He shared his story with former colleagues, emphasizing the lessons of restraint, calmness, and integrity. He spoke about the importance of observing before acting, listening before commanding, and earning respect through consistent behavior rather than expecting it through rank alone. His friends and peers were inspired by his reflections, noting the wisdom in his words. Hayes found that the lessons he had learned were not only applicable to leadership, but to life itself. Relationships, communication, and personal growth all benefited from the principles embodied by the Black Royal Guards. Hayes also made an effort to connect with younger officers and students, sharing the story of his encounter at the palace. He described in detail the calm, disciplined response of Sergeant Malik and the Black Royal Guards, explaining how their approach had reshaped his understanding of authority. He emphasized that discipline was not about control over others, but mastery over oneself. Hayes encouraged them to lead with integrity, patience, and humility, reminding them that true respect is earned, not demanded. One particular story he shared became especially memorable, the moment when a wandering child had run into the palace courtyard. Hayes recounted how the Black Royal Guards handled the situation with composure, ensuring the child's safety while maintaining order. He explained that this was not just about following rules, it was about acting with purpose, empathy, and calm authority. His audience listened intently, inspired by the practical lessons hidden within a simple, everyday incident. Over time, Hayes noticed changes in himself. He felt less impatient, less driven by ego, and more aware of the impact of his actions on others. He found that situations that once would have caused tension were now opportunities to exercise calmness and thoughtful leadership. He no longer relied solely on rank or past achievements to assert authority. Instead, he focused on example, integrity, and quiet influence. Hayes understood that true leadership could be gentle yet firm, calm yet powerful, and that respect could be cultivated through consistent, honorable action rather than fear or intimidation. The lessons of the Black Royal Guards also influenced Hayes's personal life. He became a better listener to family and friends, responding with empathy and patience rather than impatience or frustration. Conflicts that might once have escalated were now handled with measured words and thoughtful actions. Hayes realized that the principles he had observed in the palace, discipline, calmness, integrity, and purpose, were universal. They applied not only to ceremonial duties or professional settings, but to everyday interactions with the people around him. Years later, Hayes would reflect on that period as one of the most transformative times of his life. The encounter with the Black Royal Guards had left an indelible mark, reshaping his understanding of leadership, authority, and personal growth. He often spoke of Sergeant Malik, not as a figure of opposition, but as a teacher who had demonstrated the quiet power of discipline, the strength in restraint, and the influence of integrity. Hayes understood that the calm response that had crushed his ego at the palace was not an act of defiance. It was a lesson in life, offered in the most respectful and dignified way possible. In the end, Colonel Richard Hayes found that the experience had given him something far greater than recognition or authority. He had gained wisdom, perspective, and a renewed sense of purpose. He understood that leadership was not about commanding others, but about mastering oneself. He recognized that true strength is quiet, consistent, and guided by honor. And he realized that the Black Royal Guards had not only fulfilled their duty to the palace, they had fulfilled a greater duty, teaching a seasoned officer lessons that would resonate for the rest of his life. Hayes often shared the story with younger generations, emphasizing that the most powerful leaders are those who lead by example. He spoke of the calm composure, unwavering discipline, and quiet strength of the Black Royal Guards, inspiring others to value patience, integrity, and humility. He encouraged them to observe before acting, to listen before speaking, and to act with purpose in every situation. Ultimately, Colonel Richard Hayes understood that the true power of leadership lies not in the title one holds, but in the respect one earns through consistent, honorable actions. The Black Royal Guards had demonstrated this principle in its purest form, teaching him that calmness, integrity, and self-discipline could achieve far more than commands or orders ever could. Their lesson was clear, timeless, and universally applicable. True authority comes from character, not position, from respect, not fear, from integrity, not ego. As Hayes walked through life from that moment onward, he carried the memory of the Black Royal Guards with him, not as a story of confrontation, but as a story of enlightenment, growth, and understanding. Their calm response had indeed crushed his pride, but it had also built within him a new foundation for leadership, one that valued honor, patience, and unwavering integrity above all else. And in that lesson, Hayes found not only respect for others but a renewed respect for himself and the path he had chosen to walk in life.